Let's piece these broken pieces together. All right, guys, we're on to episode 13, Phumblepodcast. This is Pej, your host. And man, my guest today is, I want to say, one of my first real friends I made here in California back in 2003, 2004, when I first moved here. Through some youth activities, we connected. Initially, he came up here to Northern California, where I was. And then I went down to Fresno where he was. And then we just kept doing that for several years. And we just became really close. And we had so much fun, so many laughs, so many movies that we had in common, that we loved comedies like Basketball, classic. Anyway, fast forwarding now to today, 2021. He has become a successful professor of psychology, psychotherapy, and existential philosophy. He has his master's already, and he's writing his doctoral dissertation this year. He's got here his he's a licensed marriage and family therapist. More importantly than that, he's a good old friend of mine that really helped me and welcomed me to California the right way. Professor Christopher Chaffin. Long time.
Long time in both ways. It's been a long time since we've been able to hang out, and it's been, well, I guess that makes it 17 years since we first met.
Man, I feel horrible that it's been almost maybe 10, 12 years since we've actually sat in the same room.
It has been, yeah. Because once I moved down to Long Beach, it's now that much more in terms of distance.
I know I didn't move anywhere. I moved back to Maryland, and then I came back to where I was in Sacramento area. But that's not an excuse. We are working on getting together soon here. And that's not just those aren't just words. That we've been discussing offline about connecting, and we're working on a trip to SoCal. So man, tell me, how's life been, and what made you move to Southern California, Long Beach, and where did your journey take you from Fresno to then eventually to Long Beach?
Well, let's see. My ex-wife got a job in LA working for Sony in their game studio. And so this was back in 2012. Yeah, 2012. We moved down, before she was my ex-wife. We moved down together to LA, and the relationship ended about a year later, a little less than a year later, which was, I think, for the best for everyone. But I just kind of got stuck down here, because once I had lived in Fresno for 15 years, you don't really want to go back all that much. It's hot, and it's flat, and it's dull, and it's kind of dirty. No offense to Fresno or anyone living in Fresno still. But once I was living, I mean, the apartment I was in LA for that first year, I could drive 3 minutes and be at the boardwalk on Venice, and just be on the beach. And I could see the marina from the living room, and then I couldn't go back to Fresno after that. So I made my way down to Long Beach, which had like a really nice kind of chill, arty vibe to it, without as much of the, no offense to West Side LA, but without kind of the pretentiousness of West Side LA.
Okay.
And without the cost of West Side LA. And then, eventually met my current wife and got married and just kind of settled here.
Well, a belated congrats to you, and I'm looking very forward to meeting her.
Yeah.
I know that she had an unfortunate injury recently.
Yeah. Playing tennis and came down bad on her right ankle. Ended up tearing a few of her tendons. So,
Ouch.
Yeah, it's been rough.
But I think
No surgery, so she'll.
That's right. You mentioned that, and thank God for that. So, yeah, man, I hope she's back to 100% in no time, and we will wait till she is before we come down so that we can go places.
Yes. That'd be really cool.
So you did your studies down there as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I started my master's. Oh, when was that? Must have been about the same time we met, actually. I had started my master's for a couple of semesters because I was working at the university up there. And then when I got a better job offer outside of the university, obviously the university didn't want to pay for my tuition if I didn't work there anymore. So I set that aside. And then, yeah, shortly after the divorce in LA, I decided, cool, I don't have any, relationship obligations. I don't have to maintain work to contribute to a relationship or anything. I can do whatever I want. So went back to school.
Well, for the audience here, I want to mention that though schooling is, I feel like, makes perfect sense for you, considering that you're one of the smartest friends I had, and you just knew just about a lot about everything. I remember back in the day, I think we joked about it. I think we called you a walking encyclopedia. Yeah, because just anything, any topic we'd come up with to discuss, and leave it to Chris. He'd be like, "Oh, did you know this, this, and this?" And I'd be like, "I did not," but that definitely enlightened me on that. But yeah, definitely. And then it makes perfect sense that you would go back to school. And at this point, you were studying for your master's, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, and when I got back into school at that time, I went into a combined program, so it was master's and then doctorate.
Okay.
So finished the master's years ago, finished the doctorate coursework years ago, and then I've just been working on my dissertation off and on in all this time. And I think, like I took a couple of years off of working on it, so it kind of sat by the wayside. This year really went back into it pretty hard. I think just this morning I wrote another 7 or 8 pages of it. So hopefully by the end of the summer, I should get it published, and then I can make everyone call me doctor, which is the whole point of getting a doctorate in the first place.
Well, I'm sure there's more to it than just that for you, but yes,
Sure.
the label is an honor. I'm sure of that as well. Now, what did you study? We talked about it in the intro, but what made you want to study that, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Sure. I mean, again, I'd started it a long time ago because I find people to be very interesting. Kind of like you pointed out, I love learning. I love learning new things, and people are kind of the ultimate experience in that, because everyone is so different that every person I meet, I can learn a complete new person,
Yeah.
And not only do I get to learn about people in the job that I do as a therapist, I get to then take that learning and try to help them and help make their lives a little bit better. So it's I get my desire to learn filled, and I get my desire to be useful and help people filled.
That's great. I mean, um, without the schooling side for me, that's really why I started this,
Yeah,
is because I wanted to learn about people. I think that's something we both shared and had in common from day one.
absolutely.
And that's you're one of the most interesting men, and it's not Dos Equis.
That's fine. I'll make sure to let my wife know.
Yeah. uh so so that got you into psychology and what specifically uh got you to focus in on the marriage side, on the marriage therapy side?
Well, now in California, a marriage and family therapist is essentially the same as a psychologist with just a couple of small differences. So,
Okay.
every state handles the license differently because they're state-based licenses. But the only thing that's really different is I can't call myself a psychologist. I have to call myself a psychotherapist or a marriage
I
and
see.
family therapist.
Okay.
Two, I can't. There are certain places that just won't hire me. Like the VA won't hire me. They prefer to hire a psychologist, but that's more just a hiring practice thing.
What's the VA?
The Veterans Association, Veterans
Okay.
Affairs,
Okay.
governmental agency. And then third, and perhaps the most important practical one is relating to psychological testing. So I can do psychological testing only with patients that are already my patients. I can't have a business that's just come to me, I'll test you, and I'll give you a report. Other than that, like a therapist is pretty much the same as a psychologist. I guess other main difference is that a therapist has their license based on their master's degree, and a psychologist has their license based on their doctorate. So a psychologist would generally have more education and training, but that's one of the reasons why I went into making sure I got my doctorate as well, so that
Right.
that wouldn't be a difference.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah,
So, and the dissertation, once that's complete, that'll be your ticket, correct?
that'll be it. Yeah.
There you go. Cool, man. And so going back to your experience now that you have been a therapist, and I actually didn't know the technicalities as far as therapy
Sure.
versus therapist versus psychologist. Um, how's your experience been in the workforce? So once you received your master's and you got the schooling done for your doctorate, how far into that did you start working?
So you start your practical training when you're still in your master's. You do a couple of years of coursework, and then you have a year of training.
Right.
So I did that, and as soon as I finished that, I started working as a therapist under supervision. So I think it was about 2 years after I started school again that I was starting to see patients. Um,
And how was that initial like experience, or was it everything you thought it would be, or?
it was really interesting. I don't know if you remember, but when we first met, I would have been a little more quiet.
Yeah, true.
Most of my experience with you and yours with me, I've certainly been less quiet as we became more comfortable, but I've always been, for the most part, I've had a very shy, and I've had a hard time with the initial conversation of, hey, I'm Chris, how are you, what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once I get past that, it's fine. But that was something that worried me going into this job, because I had to meet new people and just start talking to them and learning about them.
Yeah.
So I did have some anxiety going into my training, seeing my very first patient, having to sit down and talk to them. But it was nothing like I expected it to be. It was so different in a lot of ways. And I think what made it more comfortable was because I was there as the expert. They were coming to me for help. It wasn't a social conversation. It was a helping conversation. And I didn't have to worry about any of the social worries that people can tend to worry about. So I can still remember my first patient. I remember pretty much everything about them. I remember their name. I remember their problems. I remember what they look like. It was a really great early experience.
Yeah.
And then since then, you know, I love my work. I love the people I work with. I love being able to be there for these people, for anyone who comes in my door. It's a great feeling.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I mean, for most people listening, they wouldn't have guessed that you were a shy person, because look at you. You're on my podcast.
I know you. We can talk.
That's true.
I can ignore the fact that countless other people will be watching this and viewing me later on down the line, because I just have to focus on you in front of me.
Sorry that this is your focus. But,
the hair makes it nicer. If you were still a brunette, maybe I'd be upset, but
that's true. Yeah, that's what the previous guest said. But you also did your own podcast. I mean, you were telling me about that. Like, what you said, 2009, I believe.
Yeah, 2000.
Or in that range, 09 to 12.
I think it was like 8, 9, 10-ish.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, no, into 2012 also. That's right. Because I did a little bit of it when I was in LA. So maybe into 2013 for a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, it was fun, you know.
Did you do that because was that I guess what the reason I brought that up was one of your motives is to kind of overcome that shyness? Was that one of them?
No. It's
Okay.
a good way of doing it, certainly, but no, I had started a website back in 2008, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And it was just, I love writing, and I wrote poetry for some of the things that we did at your house.
That's right.
Talent shows.
Yes, I
I
remember.
still have somewhere the video of us singing Righteous Brothers for the talent show together.
Oh my God.
Oh, my love, my darling, I hunger for your touch.
I know I have it somewhere. But, you know, it was, I wanted somewhere where I could just write more and put it out into the world. And eventually one of the things I did, I was playing this game Super Mario Galaxy on the Nintendo Wii shortly at some point after that. And I started a log just of me playing the game. And I'm like, all right, I played this section of it. Here's what was interesting. Here's what wasn't. That developed over time into me doing like reviews and opinions and editorials on games. And then it grew into a website that's actually still running. I just have someone else running it for me because my ex-wife, again, not ex at the time, and we started doing this video stream there were a couple of websites back then. Ustream was one, and then there's another website just before that I can't remember the name of anymore. But you know, it would have a little chat box. It was like Twitch. People could jump on and chat with you while you're video streaming. And we would talk about games and nerdy stuff. And we did that for a while. And then I started doing a straight up podcast with a couple of friends that I had made through the website and through kind of the gaming community. And then it was just the three of us. And it was Tom and Adam, and we would connect, you know, usually once a week, and just sit there and talk. And you know, I'd hit record, we'd start talking, we wouldn't edit, we wouldn't cut, we'd just go for the hour and a half that we'd talk and send it out. It was a lot of fun.
That sounds fun. That sounds like a lot of fun. And I know you were a gamer for as long as I remember, and also you loved your movies.
Yeah.
This man, I think, had every movie at one point. I feel like his library of DVDs was immaculate. I mean, to say the least. It was this is
It
before
was,
Netflix was really a thing, or even streaming online was movies. They had just started that, but yeah, we would go to his home in Fresno, and he was like, pick a movie, I have it. And I he truly had it. I mean, you name it, from 70s, 80s, night, probably even further back. He had all of the bests of the decades, and it was great. And we had some fun times watching some classics, comedy classics, which was one of our favorites because we really connected on that.
yeah.
And then as far as gaming, I don't know if we played as many video games together as we should have, but
Not really, no. When we'd be hanging out, we'd be hanging out as part of a larger group. And so it didn't make as much sense to
that's
play
true.
with video games. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think, and those were great too. Don't get me wrong. It's just it was I know that you had a big large passion for gaming, even more than me. I will admit. It's just cool that you followed that, you combined that with your writing, and then it led to a podcast, and then a website, like you said, that's continuing to go now. um uh if anything, that's admirable, the that you followed your passion, and you made something out of it. That's what I always tell my nieces now. you
Yeah.
you remember my nieces, how little they were when
Yeah.
you were, so now
And even
they're,
imagine.
yeah, they're little adults. And and one of them is she's got the entertainment bug, like I did. So it
Good.
was so I always tell her, follow it, just uh follow it, and do it with respect for yourself and for the craft and for the art. And
Well, and here you are doing it, setting an example for it.
yeah, and I'm trying to get her on here actually, but she's a little bit nervous, so we're working on it. So speaking of writing, which is what your dissertation is, that you're working on currently, and you told me an interesting story about, from the end of your doctoral schooling to now that you're writing this dissertation, there was a chunk of time of kind of like a waiting.
Yeah. My so the dissertation is essentially the new knowledge that I create and add to the psychological literature. That's the whole point of completing the doctorate, is to make new knowledge. And so to do that, you, as a doctoral student or as a doctoral candidate, I have a committee. So I have my committee chair, I have my committee reader, and they are established professors who have completed their doctorates years and years ago, and they're there to help kind of guide and shape my new piece of knowledge that's being contributed. And so I got a big chunk of it done, and my dissertation chair disappeared on me for a little while.
Right.
It was really hard to get in touch with him, and he had all kinds of stuff going on in his life, so it's understandable.
Yeah.
But also the argument that my mom and my wife and others make is it was also his job to stick around and do his job. But whatever, I think it all ended up working out fine. We reconnected a few months ago, and I've had kind of a big burst of activity. So I think hopefully within the next 4 to 5 months, I should be able to defend my completed dissertation and be done.
That's amazing. That story right there. That's a whole episode on that, on the whole waiting and the what you probably were going through mentally. How long did that take roughly, between him finding your chair disappearing and coming back?
That was a good couple of years, maybe 2 years. I think I properly started working on my dissertation back in 2017.
I see.
I got about a year's worth of work into it. He disappeared. I couldn't really make any movement on it until I knew what I needed to do and where I needed to adjust it. And, you know, one of the reasons why I don't get too upset with him is I'm also not great. We were talking about this earlier. I'm not great at doing my part of reaching out and saying, hey, I need to get this done. Because I didn't want to be a bother. But, you know, it worked out. I've got my ideas have changed. My understanding has changed over the last few years, just in terms of my experience, you know?
Yeah.
And so I've had ideas in these last few months that have been, I think, really good, strong ideas for the progress of my dissertation.
That's pretty cool. Would you look at the 2 years of waiting as kind of like a blessing in disguise? Because you got to evolve your ideas more, maybe?
Sure. I think I would have been happy if it had been done 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
I get that. Yeah.
But also, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, the things that have happened are the things that have happened. All I can do is decide what to do going forward.
I'm just thinking in those 2 years, knowing myself, if I was pursuing a doctorate in psychology and had to wait 2 years, I'd probably need a psychologist to just get through that. But
yeah. Well, you know, I had my wife. We had a lot going on. Last year we were going to get married in Costa Rica in May, and then pandemic happened, and so May didn't happen. So we had all the planning leading up to that, and then we had having to deal with rearranging all of that, and then dealing with the pandemic itself, and then getting married in October in our backyard.
Yeah.
So in that sense, maybe it's either, it was good either way. If it had been done before all of that, great. That I didn't have to work on it during all of that, also great.
Yeah. That's I've been to backyard weddings, by the way. There's some of the most beautiful weddings I've been to. And so that's, I mean, Costa Rica would be awesome, but you can go there after the event. Yeah. Honeymoon.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Gotta figure something out.
So that's awesome though, that you know, you got to work on that part of your life while you were waiting, which is equally as important, I would say. Marriage and all being being a whole part of this. You mentioned something about existential philosophy, and I'm a complete noob regarding this subject, so I'm really interested in hearing your description or explanation, it's a better word, of what that means and everything related to it.
Sure. Well, I look at it in a couple of different ways. So it plays into my work a lot as a therapist, because I'm gonna use some words that are therapy words, and then I'll back up and explain them a little bit. My conceptualization format is existential psychotherapy. And what that means is that when I meet a patient, when I start understanding a patient, I am understanding their problems within the structure and context of existential psychotherapy. There are countless different branches of psychology and psychotherapy that you could look at a person through. And so the one that really made sense for me was existential. You mentioned that we had kind of met through the religious youth gatherings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which was always interesting to me, because I was never really sure how much I actually cared about the religious part and how much I just cared about like people and hanging out with people.
Yeah.
And so when I leaned into existential, both philosophy and psychology, it made a lot of sense to me. But it definitely, it doesn't contradict religion or spirituality. You can still function within it and be spiritual or religious, but it provides a much more simple and clear explanation of life to me than faith tends to.
Okay.
So
what is that?
So the way I look at it from a psychotherapeutic perspective is essentially there are, and I'll give a short lesson essentially in what existential psychotherapy is. Existential psychotherapy states that there are 4 incontrovertible realities. There are 4 things that are the basis of existence, and we can't get away from them. One is death. We're all going to die. Everyone's going to die. Everything's going to die. But not just literally. There's endings, changes, transitions. These are all contained within the domain of death. We have freedom, where we are free to choose always. Every choice we make, every reaction we make is one that we have chosen. And every choice comes with a consequence or a responsibility. If I choose it, then I'm responsible for what happens because of my choice, or what didn't happen because of my choice. The third is isolation, where we are all inherently alone in the universe. That no matter how close we get to someone, we'll never be able to fully and completely understand them, because we'll never be able to share their experiences perfectly. We can never see life exactly through their eyes. So me and my wife, me and my mom, me and you, me and Lee, me and Nazir, there's always going to be this one little gap that exists between our understandings of each other. And then meaninglessness, that the universe, life doesn't mean anything other than the meaning that we create for ourselves in it. So a couple of those you can kind of pick up where initially someone might think it contradicts with religion and faith and spirituality. Because, you know, people would say, well, meaninglessness, no, God gives us meaning. There's a point for all of us. All the challenges are tests. They're defined for us. And okay. You know, the thing that comes up with existential psychotherapy is that the thing itself doesn't really matter. Death, freedom, isolation, meaninglessness, those are things that don't really matter in our day-to-day lives. And what I mean by that is that the therapeutic approach would look at how are we reacting to our awareness of those things. So, you know, when I was 13, almost 14, my grandmother, my mom's mom, died back in '96. And she was my absolute favorite person in the whole world. Still to this day, one of my absolute favorite people ever. She was the best. And she was the first person in my life that I was close to, that I was aware of, that died. And what that does, what that kind of experience does, is it opens you up to this awareness. I became aware of what death was. I became aware of mortality, mine and the mortality of others. My parents, you know, my friends, everyone could die. Holy crap, this was terrifying at 13. And at about the same time, that same summer, my parents were going through their divorce. So endings and changes, we moved with my mom into an apartment. So, you know, 3, 4, 5 different changes and things happening all at once. And then I had a really bad couple of years. You know, I struggled with it. Yeah. I remember thinking I was handling it well at the time, but when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, he was not handling that well at all.
Right.
But is what it is, and that's the stuff that's important. How are we dealing with these things? How are we coping with the awarenesses that we develop? So when I work with a patient in terms of existential psychotherapy, that's kind of how I try to see them. How did they become aware of death, freedom, isolation, or meaninglessness? And then how did these 4 domains begin to practically interact with their lives? How did they begin to cope with this stuff and to react to this stuff? And then we're looking at symptoms. We're looking at anxiety. We're looking at depression. We're looking at obsessive compulsiveness. We're looking at ADHD sometimes when it's, and all of these when they're non-biological, when they're created as a result of psychological functions.
I see. So over the nurture of someone's life on Earth.
Exactly.
When that comes in. Yeah.
And sometimes it combines with the nature component because someone may have been predisposed towards anxiety, but it wasn't until they had a major event that really leaned them into their anxiety that it then became problematic.
Yeah.
Because anxiety on its own isn't bad. It just depends on how we use it, how it functions, how we react to it.
It's and what you mentioned regarding the passing of your grandmother when you were 13, it and how it was your first, I think the word you used was you became aware of death and that we're here on borrowed time, essentially.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a story my dad shared with me when I was younger, and he brought it up again recently, actually. And it was that he, when he was a little kid, he was full of joy, always positive, and he still is, right? Like you know him, you've met him.
Yeah.
But it was for him, he said, one of the most profound moments in his young life was when he learned that we all die. And when he learned that we all die, the first question he asked is that, well, then what's the point?
Yes.
Right. And he asked this question to himself. Mostly it was more, directed at his own mortality and all of that. And he said it kind of just at that age, it kind of made him kind of be like, oh, well, that's a bummer, right? But because he was like, that innocent child mind, he didn't and obviously he's in his late 60s now, and he still says that. He still says, like, he almost because you were mentioning the different mental health reactions that we get, right, to these things. Some people fear it. My wife, she fears death. Like she's very she has a lot of anxiety about health, right? I believe the term is hypochondriac.
Yes.
And so she fears it. My dad, on the other side, like if he gets sick, the whole COVID thing, right? All of these, like my wife had a hard time with that for a while because she didn't get it, thank God. However, she always feared getting it. She would always associate herself with the worst case scenarios of the disease. And where, and I always think like, wow, this range of views on the same topic of death, and as you mentioned, reality. And it's just interesting to me how our minds can either be completely at peace with it or fear it to no extent, or somewhere in between.
Well, and it's always really interesting the way that works because people will respond in so many different ways. But when you talked about your dad and kind of where he's at now too, where, all right, well, if I get sick, I get sick. Okay.
Yeah.
There's this acceptance of something. And one of the one of the ways that existential philosophy ties in now is specifically about kind of how your dad sees the world, and it's one of my favorite things. So this is my home office. We built it in the backyard when I was working on my dissertation a few years ago.
It's beautiful, by the way.
Thank you very much. And then I've got my proper office where I have my private practice, just 5-10 minutes down the road. And in my office, I have the statue sitting on one of my bookshelves, and it's of the Greek mythological figure Sisyphus, the man who has to roll the boulder up the mountain, and then it rolls back down, and he has to do that over and over for eternity. So I've got that statue, and I've got a little poster of him as well, because he's really important to kind of the basic idea that we're just talking about. And so there was this French Algerian philosopher named Albert Camus, back in World War II, 1940s kind of thing. And he wrote an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, where he takes the character of Sisyphus and describes his story and tries to explain his view of existence through the myth of Sisyphus. And he starts this essay with kind of an attention grabber. And his attention grabber is saying that all of philosophy, all the way back through antiquity, is wrong. That they're all asking the wrong questions. They're looking for the wrong answers. The only question that matters is that of suicide. Is life worth living, or is life not worth living? If it is worth living, then you live it. If it isn't worth living, then why keep living it? You would naturally, logically have to commit suicide. So he gives you this attention grabber just to kind of say, hey, it's this or that. But then as he goes through the essay, you get the third option, the more realistic option for, is life worth living? And let's say we get into the sense of, I don't know if life is worth living. I don't know what the point is. Like you say, your dad said when he first had that experience, he realized, oh man, everyone's going to die. So what's the point?
Yeah.
Camus really pushes the idea, two ideas. One, the universe doesn't care about you. The universe doesn't care about anyone or anything, because the universe doesn't have the capacity to care. It doesn't have thought and feelings and picking one person over the other. It's just the universe. Why are we giving it so much power to wonder why it's hurting me, or it's the universe's fault that I didn't get this thing or that thing?
Yeah.
So we take that responsibility away from the universe, but then we have to put that somewhere, and we put that responsibility into ourselves. We then create the value, the meaning of our lives for ourselves, because from Camus' perspective, there's no caring universe, there's no God, anything like that from his perspective. The universe and existence are just absurd coincidences, and while you are alive, you might as well make it something worth living.
Yeah, and there are a lot of lessons with that, because when you make that choice, I feel it's you start to really learn about, well, I can speak from my own experience, because I obviously I've made that choice, because we if it was that black and white, I don't know if it's so black and white like the initial intro of that book says.
And it is,
essay.
Right. After the tension, and then he really expands on it.
Yeah, like you said, attention grabber. But it's I think some of the most valuable lessons I've learned in my 35 years were during the times that I had to endure the biggest tests or trials in my life, or at least what I defined as tests or trials. And that's different for everyone, of course. But and you can correct course on this conversation if I take it, if I'm taking it elsewhere. But what I'm thinking of is someone has a, let's say, so with the realities, right? So someone is having a tough day, like a teenager, like my niece, for example, or someone who's still not uh, at their full mental capacity, right? They're still coming into their own as an adult or a young adult. Um, what do you think of this method of, because they're different parenting skills, right? Or uncling skills as far as for myself, but uh different methods, different, there's, they label them in layman's term, but like old school parenting or new school parenting. So what, for me, my experience, like what really motivates me is um I have a hard day, like when I was younger or even now, uh again, during those times of me enduring it, I come to the conclusion, or a temporary conclusion, that my hey, someone else gone through the exact same thing, probably, or not even probably, definitely, right? Because there are books on my issue. There's people who've written essays, or there's videos people have uploaded on the same issue. So when I see all that and I see that they've survived that, I get into this comparing thing. Like I say, okay, well, if they can do it, no disrespect to them, but they're human just like me, then I can do it, right?
Sure.
So, but not everyone responds to that method, right? To that type of learning, or that type of pushing forward. Like, and I know that because I've tried that with some, either my own students through music, or even like people I know, family that are younger. When I say, hey, listen, you're going through this right now, and you're probably thinking this, and that, and that, oh my God, life sucks, this, that. But then I tell them about, like, but look, all these people have gone through the exact same issue, and they're fine. They made it. They got through it. They saw the other side. Um, but again, not everybody responds properly to that. Some people are like, well, I'm not them, right? Or that's what they say. And they're telling their version of the truth. Um, so, and this might be kind of, like I said, off course, but it just made me think about that, and I wanted to see how you would um, motivate someone like that to push through as a therapist.
Well, like you say, everyone's different, and so it's really hard. I think that when you look at that approach of, hey, here are all of these other people who have had the same issue, what you're trying to accomplish is something we call universality. Like, look, you're not alone. You're not uniquely broken. You're not alone in the world. Here are all of these other people who have dealt with the same thing and are alive still, and have gotten through it. The risk with that sometimes, and like you said, someone says, well, but I'm not them, or they're not me.
Yeah.
Is because we don't want always to be just like everyone else. My problems feel big and real and unique to me. And when someone tells me that here are all of these other people who have dealt with it, maybe I hear that as, here are all of these other people who have dealt with it, so why haven't you? Even though that's not the intent, it's to inspire hope, it's to connect to that universal experience. Some people will hear it that way, and they'll think, but I'm not them. This is my problem right here, right now. So it's hard, for some people it's a very effective approach, and for some people it's not.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges, if you're talking about younger people who haven't really gotten into as much of an ability to, and even this isn't quite fair, but as much of a critical thinking ability or their mental kind of growth. Because I know like teenagers who have really sharp minds who are able to think clearly, but biologically, there's still hormone development, there's still neural development, there's still room for that person to grow into more of themselves over time. But again, it's hard, because ideally what you'd want to do is work with the person and try to find what works for them. So as a therapist, if I'm sitting in a room with someone and we're going through some of this stuff, then part of my goal is to try to understand more of what they're going through. It's to maybe try to relate with parts of my own life and to put them out there as ways of connecting, to show, hey, here's something I've gone through that's similar. Do you feel like this is similar? Am I understanding you correctly? Does this feel like something we can be on the same page about?
With more sensitivity.
With more sensitivity.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, absolutely. I think that's something that I've picked up just from my experience growing up but it would help, I'm sure it helps a lot when you're educated in it to the degree that you are. It becomes a lot quicker. Like you can really probably more easily see what that person is asking for, so
sometimes yes and no. It's one of those things where, like this example of, well, here are all of these other people who got better. Being as educated in psychology and in human kind of behavior and thought and emotion as I am, as soon as I see that, my first thought is, okay, well, how can this help? How can this hurt? What are the possible outcomes? And so then, like, I have to step back and I take more time to say, okay, I have to plan a little bit more. I don't necessarily have the ease or the luxury to just jump in and say something all the time.
I see.
So in that sense, I think it's more that I become aware of how much harm I can do and have to really be careful not to cause harm.
Yeah, that's your job.
That's my job. But a lot of these books at the end here are by the same author who really writes about existential psychotherapy. And one of the key points, actually, I think this book I have inside, but one of the key points in one of the books where he talks about how to be a therapist is he uses the words fellow traveler. And what he means by that is we connect to the patient because we are also a person. We are a fellow traveler along the path of life. So it's kind of like, hey, I see you're hurting. Let me walk beside you for a little bit. Let me take a little bit of your load so you can have an easier time walking. And then when you feel better, you can walk on your own and I can go and our paths will diverge, kind of thing.
That's cool. That's I mean, there's love involved in all of that, right?
Yeah.
There has to be that passion for another person, that connection of love to get us to think that clearly about it. Which brings me to the point of where does love fit? Does love kind of sprinkle in over all four of those domains, or is it where does it kind of fit inside of that?
Sure. I guess that depends on the type of love you're talking about. I would say that it can absolutely fit in all of them. Some people define purpose of life through love. A strong relationship, your wife, your family, these are connections of love. And there are absolutely people who, not wrongly, will make that the center point of their existence. This is why I exist, in order to love and be loved.
Mhm.
We look at that so that addresses meaninglessness. We look at it in context of isolation. If I love and am loved, then I am closer and closer. I am less alone in the world. In terms of freedom, maybe it guides my choices. Maybe it's the reason I make my choices or how I define my choices. And then in death, yeah, you know, death is the foundation of existential anxiety. And my entire dissertation is on death anxiety and really expanding it to look at how it interacts with people's day-to-day lives. But one of the common components of death anxiety in people is the desire to beat death, to live beyond death. And one of the most common ways of doing that is having kids. I get to exist beyond my lifespan because I've created another version of myself, and this version will remember me after I'm gone, and then their kids will remember me after I'm gone. So I've guaranteed myself an extra 100 years of existence, even after I've died.
I see.
So in that sense, you know, love is necessary.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's the that's what that author was talking about when you were mentioning that he gets into the third option, and I think that it's love that gets us to fight. It's on they sound opposites, but you fight for life, right?
Sure.
You know,
love is a very powerful motivator for life.
That's right. Yeah. Man, I mean, I can talk for hours about this topic because it's so, I mean, we only scratched the surface, obviously, but you know, I wanna learn more about this, and I want you to come back on to discuss because this idea of love, as if you haven't guessed already, that's one of my passions, and
it's a good passion,
and all forms of it, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's for a craft, whether it's for a human being, whether it's for my pets,
Sure.
whether it's for traveling, whatever. I'm
you're living fully.
Yeah, and I think where I learned my love for my career, which is music, and this is no lie, ladies and gentlemen, I was sitting in Chris's car, and he put on Bohemian Rhapsody, and I don't even know if you know that this happened, but we were driving. I can't even remember where we were driving. I think we were in Fresno.
Okay.
It was your blue Honda. Remember that car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That car.
That was a great car.
It's a great. We might have been going to one of the Denny's because we'd go to Denny's until like 3 a.m.
Those are fun, man. When I could eat whatever I wanted without any.
Tell me about it.
But yeah, and that 6 minutes and some seconds of that song, it gave me so much clarity in that moment of where I wanted to take my life. As far, yeah. I don't think I even shared that with you, but literally after that trip, that song stuck with me, and obviously that was like it opened a whole portal of, obviously you knew I was a musician already, but but it was more for fun. It wasn't really like, I wasn't taking it like as a career. I was like 21, 22 at that point, and
and I knew it was a big passion for you because you had the tattoo of the musical notes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so music was in my genes through my dad and my mom. My mom being a singer, my dad was a drummer and a keyboardist in his own music career. But anyway, I was going through what I think a lot of youth during that age in college, right? I was in community college at the time, and I was trying to figure out, what am I trying to do with my life, right? I was pursuing all these careers that are safe, you know, like as far as financially and all that. But after getting through Bohemian Rhapsody, and by the way, I had heard that song before, but there was something about that moment sitting in the car, and I think your love for that song, and then our shared love for that song, and then me thinking further about the details and the makeup, and I think you even helped explain like this is the opera section, and when you told me that, and I was like, wow, like my whole life just got flipped over, and in a good way,
Yeah.
because it gave me clarity, and I was like, this is what I need to do. So anyway, most people know my obsession with Freddie Mercury, and how, you know, I used to see myself as like the resurrection, like you know, another Persian man in the West.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, man, that was um those moments are genuine and they're rare. And my every day is to find moments like that, to just have moments even close to that, because that was like the top of the hill for me. But
That's really cool to hear.
yeah, man, it was so anyway, love, going back to that, it was just, I've been passionate about, I'm a passionate person to begin with, but then I always try to get the most out of every experience that I pursue, or that is presented to me, good or bad, actually. So
Sure.
it's, you know, but
Experience.
yeah. So and I think you yourself are a passionate person, especially when it comes to reading, as everyone can see.
They are
And
not decoration.
yeah, they probably would be in my house, but but no, my older niece, by the way, avid reader from
Good.
like the age of 4 or 5.
Right.
Nika, you know,
Yeah.
she brother, she can get through an entire book, which is probably for you, it's no big feat, but for a lot of my family members, you know, reading is actually a chore.
Sure.
So, but for her, she can get through it, and she'll read like 1,000-page book in half a day. Like
Yeah.
she can read really. I mean, it's great, and I always tell her, you know, like, I think there is a lawyer written in there somewhere. But you know, we joke about that. And I
You
don't.
wouldn't be a Persian uncle if you didn't say you're a lawyer or something.
Yeah, and she'll retort with, "Yeah, you're a musician."
Right.
But no, I never push her in that sense, because by the way, to button up what I was saying about my career in music, as you just said, the stereotypical Iranian parenting, actually a lot of Middle Eastern parenting, is that, and it makes sense, and I understand where that comes from, because they leave their countries, right? Countries that are probably oppressed,
Yeah.
coming to America to chase that word freedom, right? And they say, okay, my kids, again, that death, now that ties into it, because they want the extension of themselves to be successful. And how do they see that happening? Because schooling, especially for Baha'is,
Sure.
They see that as, oh, this is your chance, you know, you can get educated, you can get to the top of the schooling, you can get to the best school. So anyway, not for everybody, obviously, but there are many careers that don't require schooling to be part of the equation. And of course, I got my bachelor's in theory. However, my passion's been music, and even this is kind of related to that, because I wanted to be involved in entertainment, right? This is tied to that. And since I don't perform music as much as I'd like to anymore, just given the pandemic is the last, you know, kind of obstacle, but you know, living my adult life, quote unquote, you know, it's harder to go on tour and do that. I have a family that needs me to be home, and I want to be home for them and all of that. So this podcast, and anyway, my dad was one of the first people when I went to. I was like, Dad, I think I want to be a musician, like study music. And I was I was anxious about his response, but to my pleasant surprise, he said, "If you love it, I will support you all the way." And that was huge for me because I was nervous because he brought his kids here, and I remember those conversations in Iran as a little 7-year-old, 6-year-old when he was telling me that we need to leave this and that, and now and looking back and all of that, the sacrifices they made, um, the fact that he supported that is, I know that was huge. And yeah, he kind of deep down in himself, he loved music too. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and
playing
that's
days with him.
interesting because yeah, it makes sense for people to come over and to think, okay, let's get ourselves into a position where we can be safe, and that includes financial security. So,
Yeah.
doctor, mohandes, all this. Become a doctor, become a lawyer, become an engineer, become
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
not only has respect and status, but comes with job security.
Yeah.
But there's an important alternate component that I think sometimes gets lost, and it's something that's really highlighted as being present in your relationship with your dad. It's also because you're coming from an oppressed place, so that you can come here and choose to do whatever the hell you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
bigger point of it, is
Mm-hmm.
you can't do what you want in Iran, so you come here so that your son can do what he wants to do. And so I think that was fantastic for you and your dad.
Yeah, I think and by the way, that tattoo you're talking about, he designed it. Ultimately, he said, "I'm gonna tie in my last name into this, but but that was after my mom.
The calligraphy in it as well.
Yeah, it's just, I guess if people don't know, it's just it's cursive Farsi mixed with the staff of the treble clef, and there's the treble clef, and then so it's my full name in like calligraphy style of Farsi, right? And that my father came up with. That's where that hanging letter, that's the I guess it'll translate to an A in English. Um, but yeah, so anyway, to tie things all together, these 4 domains I think are, I mean, I didn't know anything about the realities that we all deal with, but until you broke it down. And I do want to learn so much more about it, but before and that'll be the next time you're here, because you got to promise me to come back. That's
Promise to have me back another time.
oh my God, more than welcome, man. So you've been on this kind of like a fun reading and posting about your reads recently that I've been keeping up with. Which, by the way, plug anything you want to plug as far as social media or.
Good.
Okay.
I keep my social media private just because I don't want my patients coming and.
Oh, I got you.
So it's all private anyway.
No, for sure. Yeah, makes sense. Well, anyway, you've been posting about some reads that, and then you post a little description and explanation on that. So tell us how you came up with that idea, and what are you on now currently?
Sure. Well, like you said, I mean, I've been reading since I was a kid. I'm always reading something. And let's see, around Christmas last year, we went to visit my mother-in-law and father-in-law because they bought a house in Palm Springs, which is just an hour and a half, 2 hours away. So we went up there for the holidays, and Mom came and visited as well. So that was really nice to do a holiday together. And for some reason, Mom and I had to go to Barnes and Noble. And all right, drag me to a bookstore. Yeah, I'll go to a bookstore gladly. And there were a couple of books there that I really liked the covers of right up front. Like, and that'll catch me. If you have a nice cover and an interesting title, I'll buy the book and I'll read it. So you
judge a book by its cover, huh?
I judge books by their covers. Yeah, it doesn't always work out. The last book I read was really disappointing, unfortunately.
Okay.
But these, let's see, I might have a hard time pointing from here through here. This set of books is what I've read so far since the beginning of the year.
Okay.
It's 24 books, I think.
Wow.
And I bought the first two because, yeah, it looked interesting.
Yeah.
I powered through them, and it reinvigorated, because I've been reading, but not quite as much as I usually do. And it kind of reinvigorated me. And I thought, oh, yeah, this is great. So I went and I got more books, and I got more books, and I got more books. And I think by the time I got through the 13th book, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a thing out of this. Because before then, I was just reading to read.
Yeah.
And so I decided I'd make a thing out of it. Decided to post little 1-sentence reviews to give myself a limit. Otherwise, I'd sit there and I'd just talk and talk and talk. And yeah, you know, some of these, there are 2 or 3 that I've read before, like Arabian Nights I've read before, Camus' The Stranger I've read before, American Gods I've read before, but for the most part, they're all new. And there have been some really interesting, fascinating books along the way. There's one book. I'll talk about one book. So it's called A Matter of Death and Life. And it
ties into what we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, and it's by the author of the Existential Psychotherapy books.
Oh, okay.
His wife also writes a lot about psychology and feminism and relationships in terms of the intimacy that exists between people in general. And they found out a couple of years ago, they've been married for 60 plus years. They're in their late 80s. And they found out a couple of years ago that she had terminal cancer. So they decided to write a book together. Now, his work has been about death and death anxiety and existential stuff. So they decided they would take turns going back and forth in the chapters about this process of knowing that one of them was going to die and what their lives were like as they had to, in real time, deal with the imminent loss of the person that was the other half of them, you know?
Wow.
She dies about halfway through the book, and the second half of the book is him for 120 days just dealing with it. Not in the best way sometimes. Like, he struggles. I cried like 3 times, big, heavy, ugly crying reading that book.
Wow.
Because there are things in there, there's some really, really cool things in there that I remember when they announced this book, and I felt really bad that this was happening, but I was also so excited to read it at the same time, because you don't get this opportunity that often. And I would frankly recommend everyone everywhere read it if you get the opportunity.
Wow. Well, I don't know if you know, and my wife just lost her father to cancer, so this might be a book I want to have her read, and I'd love to read it myself. So so there's the plug. So go ahead and so that yeah, that book, it's called Life and Death. Is that what you said it was called?
It's A Matter of Death and Life by Irvin and Marilyn Yalom.
Irvin Yalom and Marilyn Yalom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's a great. I mean, it's almost. It feels like it. That second half of that book must have been, actually the whole book must have been more like a blog, but in a book, because it's kind of like, because even though they're educated in the field, or at least the husband was, he's like experiencing those traumas. He's experiencing the reality, and as he's writing and as she's writing.
And even him, after decades of doing this work, he still experiences something new, because this is a new experience for him. I don't want to spoil any of it, but you
No,
know,
yeah.
you talked about your wife and your father having very different experiences of death anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to see how Irvin and Marilyn in this have very different, almost similar to the contrast between your wife and your father. That one of them is very anxious and stressed, and kind of in denial, and the other one is largely in a state of acceptance.
Right. Wow.
But it's
So,
a
yeah.
fascinating read. I've read it twice already, and it just came out in March, just because I needed to read it again.
I will definitely be ordering that book, because it definitely, I mean, the fact that you brought that up, and my own experience this past year with my father-in-law's passing, and you know, cancer being the link, and yeah, there's a lot there, and thank you for sharing that. I want to close on a more lighter note.
Sure.
It might be lighter depending on
Most
your
things would be lighter, to be honest.
And that is that you know, that ink that you saw on my arm, I've had since you've known me in 2004, 2005. I have not, however, seen the ink on your arm until this episode right here.
Right, that's right. Let's see.
So let's see. I'm trying to see if I can make out what it. Okay.
I don't know if it's mirroring. I can't quite tell, but in the center is it's super nerdy. So it's Gandalf's mark from Lord of the Rings. It's his rune. It's the G. And then surrounding that, there's a ring of fire, which is representative. There are 3 rings, and they represent the rings that the elves have, the rings of power.
Yeah.
The ring of fire is Gandalf's ring, and the power of it is to inspire courage and hope in the face of despair. The second ring is the ring of starlight, which is Galadriel's ring. It's a ring of preservation and protection. And the third ring is a ring of air, which is Elrond's ring, which is a ring of healing. So, you know, it when I came up with the idea of it, it stamped who I wanted to be, like, as a person and as a therapist, into one cool nerdy design.
Hey, that's it's not nerdy, man. I think it's pretty cool, like, and it's artistic, and you've always been artistic, whether through your poetry or even through design. That's awesome. That's really cool. And I think that was your moment of clarity of wanting to pursue that career.
Well, I got this actually after I finished my master's.
Okay, so
this was like the stamping it onto me, like, all right, cool, we're here, we're not going anywhere.
I love it, man. That's a much more thought out design than mine, but it's good.
Well, I can't take credit for the art by any means, because I am a terrible artist.
So am I.
My initial drafts, I saved them somewhere as I was scribbling them. They looked so bad. They're different. It was when I sat with the tattoo artist.
Yeah.
And it was a friend of mine from grad school, actually, who she had 8 or 9 tattoos already from this guy, and recommended him highly. So she came with me, and we went there, and I talked through the idea with him. I showed him my initial design, and we sat there. He must have spent an extra hour and a half over our appointment time, and he didn't charge me anything else for it, which was fantastic. But he sat and made sure that we came up with a design that years later I'm still happy with, and that I'm always going to be happy with.
That's key, man.
Yeah.
Whenever you get a permanent stamp on you, it's important that it's evergreen, and it's always like going to be, you love it, just like mine, right? I still, you know, almost 20 years later, I'm as happy with it now as I was then. Yeah. That's a cool story, man. That's great. Well, Chris, I think we
Sorry.
do.
If I can just a little addendum to that story, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't tell my mom that I was going to get a tattoo. I didn't tell her until after it was done, and my friend and I were grabbing lunch, and I sent her a picture of it. So she didn't. I saw like the bubbles of a text response, and then she didn't say anything. And she called me 3 hours later, and all she said was, "Christopher Jun, that's so ungentlemanly." She likes it now, and like with the story and everything, but I just figured you'd get a kick out of her initial reaction to that.
Dude, I love your mom, man. She was so funny, and she was so that reaction of hers reminds me of my mom's, because when I didn't do it like how you did. I didn't just go for it.
Sure.
I was still too young. I was living in their house at the time, so I had to. But I asked my mom. I was like, "Mom, I want to get a tattoo. What do you think?" She was like, "Absolutely not." And then I said, "Come on, Mom. It's. I know roughly what I want to do. I have an idea. It's going to be about music. That's what I love. This and that." And she was like, and in her mind, she took a gamble. She said, "Okay, go ask your dad." In her mind, she was like 1,000% sure that my dad's going to absolutely say no. And she said, "If he says yes, then go for it." Anyway, she goes to work. I'm home. My dad comes home. She comes back home to him having the design of the ink of the tattoo, telling her, because initially I had to kind of massage him into accepting it, but then once he saw the vision, like your mom, he really liked it. And my mom, when she found out, she's like, "I can't believe it. I was totally sure you'd say no." But yeah. And anyway, this was the first design of his, and now he just designed a tattoo for my sister.
Nice.
So she just got a tattoo recently, so I'm sure she loves me telling everyone here about that. But anyway, I miss your mom. I miss you. I miss our times, and we have to have a much lighter episode with you on, talking about the fun times, the good old times, and even creating new memories. Just we've shared some awesome laughs, man, with our commonalities and connections. So so Chris, thank you. This has been episode 13 of Fumble Podcast. Good luck with your dissertation, and keep me posted on that. And thank you for joining me on this episode of Fumble Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. As always, subscribe, like, and follow Fumble Podcast on YouTube and your podcast platform of choice. Thank you again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one. Together we'll purify the mind and have a good time. I'll showcase your